This week, Mcafee trademark dispute. Customers want large security vendors. Do you trust your PIM in the cloud? CyberArk struggles. And embrace change. All that and more. So stay tuned. This is a Security Weekly production. Brought to you by IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. IT Pro TV offers 1,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video training content. Course topics include Certified Cloud Security Professional, Ethical Hacking, Cryptography, and VMware. You can stream their courses live or on demand to your mobile device, all for one low monthly subscription price and cancel at any time. Visit itpro.tv/enterprise security to upgrade your brain with the most popular IT certifications. Use the code ES30 for a free 7-day trial and save 30% off for life. Welcome, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly, everyone's favorite show for enterprise security news. Well, maybe it's not everyone's, but it's at least mine, and that's what matters to me. This week, John Stratton is on hiatus, and we decided to bring on some very special guests. Most of you will recognize our illustrious co-host that we've brought in for this episode. To my right, Mr. Doug White makes his triumphant return to the Security Weekly Network. Doug, welcome.
Always. I love to have a triumphant return to the Security Network.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. And Doug, you're a professor at Roger Williams University.
I am. I'm the chair of cybersecurity.
Excellent.
Which sounds a lot cooler than it is.
It does sound cool.
Yeah.
Mr. Michael Santarcangelo joins us on the lines via Skype. Michael, welcome to your first appearance on Enterprise Security Weekly. Oh, we can't hear Michael. Are you there, Michael?
I'm here.
Oh, we didn't hear your initial.
It's okay. It was an attempt at humor, and it fell flat.
Oh, so it was just, it was good that.
I'll stick to the security stuff. Go that direction.
Well, I'm excited about this show. We're going to talk about some security news and end-user security awareness training. There was, it was interesting. There wasn't a whole lot of product announcements and integrations this week, which is typically where we want to focus. So the news is kind of interesting. First, we start with a trademark dispute. So here's what happened. John Mcafee, right, sold out in 1991 from Mcafee, along with the rights to the Mcafee name, just the Mcafee name. Now John's got this new venture, and they're doing antivirus type stuff, and they want to call it the John Mcafee security product. Intel says, who owns Mcafee, says, nope, trademark dispute. Here's your legal paperwork. Thank you very much. We'll see you in court. I mean, I'm sure Intel has like a gigantic. Most companies of that size have teams and teams that are protecting intellectual property, and that's their sole job. And typically, my advice if you're in that situation is to just cry uncle immediately and move on, which is my suggestion to John, is to just move on. I mean, call the company what it is and use John Mcafee's name, because it's interesting in a trademark dispute. Like, your name is very interesting, and I think professional athletes go through this a lot. There's a lot of interesting laws with your name as it relates to the rights to a trademark.
Yeah, a lot of athletes and celebrities and other companies that were founded by individuals because they trademarked their name. So, Doug White Incorporated gets trademarked, and then you sell that, you sign some document or whatever because it makes sense at one point in time, and then boom, all of a sudden you're back and you want your name back. And then there's all this, and a lot of times I think these cases just end up being about the weight of the attorneys. So how, who's got the biggest pile of attorneys and who's going to withstand this onslaught for the longest. So you can end up in this just long drawn out battle, years and years, because civil court. I mean, I did a case once, and it was like 7 years, before it came back to court. So you're getting all your old notes out. So this stuff can, because nobody's dying or anything like that. So they can easily stall this stuff forever and ever and ever. And Intel will. I mean, Intel's going to eat you alive.
Exactly, that's the strategy. Because being in a legal battle for 7 years costs you a lot of money. Intel, it's like whatever.
Yeah, they got lawyers sitting around doing nothing anyway. So.
Well, and by the way, right? So does Mcafee. I mean, Mcafee himself has money.
That's true. Well, that's true.
And MGT has stuff from it, and frankly, this is good for both companies because now everybody's going to talk about it, and it's going to be
true.
It's going to be there.
It's a good point.
Here's the thing that I think is interesting, because what I'm reading when people talk on this is they focus on one of two things. They go, oh, so McAfee doesn't even have his name anymore, and I think Doug just addressed that. But the second part is, and I think Paul, you alluded to this on the way in. He sold out McAfee, not John McAfee. But when you start looking at trademark stuff, and it's look, I know lawyers, I hire lawyers, I like lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding in these types of cases is, especially when you're looking at trademark, is if it can create confusion in the mind of a consumer. So McAfee, the company, was a security-oriented company. The John McAfee proposed company is a security-oriented company.
Yep.
That absolutely creates confusion.
Absolutely.
So as Doug pointed out, this is going to get bantered about for a while, but without sounding too cynical, I'm not sure that wasn't the point in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
I think that's a great point because I mean, it is a strategy for a product to go out there and just create controversy. People do it all the time. It's the how do you get your name back in front of the headline when you do something outrageous or ridiculous? You drop your pants on stage or whatever, and all of a sudden you're all over the headlines again. And
Miley Cyrus, I thought, did that very well.
She did do that very
now
well.
She's got like this thing on The Voice, which is like a not controversial kind of thing.
That's how you keep your name up there. I mean, if you hire a publicist, somebody's got to be the bad guy. So why not us?
Coming up next on Startup Security Weekly, Doug and I are going to broadcast naked.
I'm there.
I'm going to be video. I'm going to be audio.
Audio only for
I'm getting ready already.
Let's see. The CEO of Palo Alto, I believe, Mark McLaughlin. I think it was Palo Alto. Yeah. Yeah, it's Palo Alto. Basically, the TLDR is he stated that new security companies are having a tough time getting funded in today's economy, and that customers, enterprises, want one large security vendor and don't want all these different security vendors. I thought each of those 2 points were interesting, coming from who it's coming from is very interesting. I don't necessarily agree that those two things are true. Do you guys?
I don't agree with either of them.
That was the camp I was in.
I'll give you some insight why. After RSA this year, one of the comments, and this is an article I ended up writing, somebody said, wow, it's like security DIY. And I went, wait, hold on. When you say security DIY, what exactly do you mean? Because obviously, right, on Security Weekly, for example, we're showing people how to do stuff all the time. No, his point was there are so many options now and so many clever ways to bring them together. You can really get the security you want for your organization at a far greater level of control than you were ever able to do before.
I like that.
So whereas we have, as an industry, volleyed back and forth between, do you want a best in breed and lots of it, or do you want a single box and one throat to choke? I love it when people say that. No, I don't see it that way. I see companies right now are trying to identify the problems that they need to solve, and they're looking for the best solution that's able to do that. And I think what we're going to see are the solutions that win are the ones that integrate with other solutions.
Yes. Go ahead, Doug.
Well, I'll be the counterpoint. I don't disagree with anything anybody said. I do think that there's a continuum there of how adept your organization is at dealing with this. Because a lot of times if you get consulting calls, and I get a consulting call from some guy named James, and he says, Doug, we don't know what to do. We don't, we're a mid-sized enterprise. We don't have a bunch of IT people here. We don't have a bunch of cyber people here. They really do kind of lean off into that. I really just want to call 1-800-SAVE-MY-ASS and have that call be answered, and Super Cyberman shows up in the lobby and says, all your troubles are solved, my friend, instead of having to go shopping and start looking through all these different products, because it's kind of overwhelming. And I compare it it's like buying a car with parts. My brother always built these souped-up race cars, and he could build a badass car. But the problem was for me, I'm not going to be able to do that. I just want to go down there and say, I want to buy a badass car. I'd like it sitting right there when I come in the door. So I think there's a continuum of it. I agree that I think having all these options is great because it does allow the best products to come forward. It allows you to put together a really nice piece of equipment to meet your needs. But at the same time, a lot of enterprises just say, look, we want to be done with this. We don't want to spend a lot of money here.
I know. I'll disagree to a certain point in that even in the medium-sized businesses, that there are security problems that you have that can't be solved with one large corporation. And I think that as a security company gets bigger, it's more difficult for them to innovate. And then you can get the smaller guy and you're like, wow, like I really have this problem and that fits really nicely into my security program. So I'm going to go buy it from that individual smaller company because it really fits in nicely. Like Michael said, it makes the right integrations and it solves that really bad pain point for me that large security vendor, I mean, they might have a solution for it, but it doesn't do what I want to do in the right way. So,
and there's probably an interesting angle there to talk about from the startup side, and we can talk about that more on the startup show. But listening to both of you, because right, this is one of those areas where you can go, yeah, you're right. And there's so many companies that use so many different ways to be able to do it. If our focus here is on the enterprise, though, the enterprise teams tend to be large enough now, and they've been burned enough trying every way possible that I really think they're getting more discerning on what it is that they're looking for and how it is that they're looking for it. And I guess what's also interesting too, and I'd be curious more of both of your takes on this, how about the MSSPs, right? Because I think, Doug, you're right. There's a lot of companies out there that go, cyber? Did you say spider? I don't want to deal with this. And so they'll hire somebody, but that's where a lot of the VARs and the MSSPs are in the game.
And I think Michael's a great point. Even as I do my startup, right, and I see other MSSPs, and I know lots of people that work for MSSPs, they will adopt other people's technology and then offer that as a service to the small and medium-sized guys. So that's a great solution for medium-sized businesses. I also want to bring up too that in the larger enterprises on the other end of the spectrum, I've seen a lot of organizations write their own solutions or some integration of solutions, and I firmly believe that there's going to be a migration away from that because now we have so many options in vendor land, and it's every other week I talk to a large, usually financial, because they're way ahead of the curve on security in a lot of areas. Well, I say, well, we have the solution does X, Y, Z, and I'm like, there's like 3 or 4 startups or even companies that have been around for 3 or 4 years that you just haven't heard of yet that do like exactly that. And by the way, they've got a team of data scientists and big data experts and cloud experts, so you can just put it in the cloud and it will probably get you 90% of the way there, but you're going to be ahead of the curve because they're going to keep innovating with a team of really talented people, whereas you're still kind of limited, and now you can go off and do other things as well.
I think this is following the evolutionary curve that programming and application development followed. If you go back in the 60s, it was the same exact thing. You had people that had expertise in-house, and they're developing custom code. You had people desperate for solutions who don't, and don't get me wrong, the people I say that are looking for these one-stop shopping, I don't know that that's necessarily the best answer for them. It's an obvious, easy answer. And I think they're doing the same thing with security they did with code. You saw that same thing happen in the 70s and 80s. Everybody was screaming for, I want one big one-stop shop. Then they got it. And they said, but this doesn't meet my needs. Because then a big company comes in like IBM and they say, yeah, we'll sell this to you. It's this giant big package. You back a semi-truck up. And they go, yeah, but that costs $5 million. How much? And I don't even need all those features. And they're like, well, yeah, we can't break this apart. Come on. And then we went right back down the road into, well, let me get some smaller companies to provide these. And you still see that today.
I need to type a document. Well, you need Microsoft Word and the whole Office suite in Office 365. Right.
There's a great quote in a John Mellencamp song. I know there's a balance. I see it when I swing by. I always think about that a lot in this. Let's talk about the other part of his comment.
Well, let's talk about that let's do that in startup. Yeah, tailor for startup. I think that's a great, because it's obviously not true. But anyway,
I was going to say that's a fairy tale. I think that's got to be an anti-competitive statement.
I agree.
Other than actually.
So the next story is Centrify Privilege Service. It says that it's the industry's first cloud-based privilege access security solution. Is that really true, Michael? I know you've studied the space a little bit more than I have.
I'm also looking at the rest of it. It says they're the leader, and okay. Anytime you start out with "we're the leader, we're the first," there's nothing like it. Then my general answer is
probably not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they say they have the ability to deploy the solution on-premise in a private cloud or PIM as a service. Do you trust your PIM in the cloud? I think a lot of people are not going to trust your PIM or PAM or however you want to say it, right?
You want to,
privilege identity management, privilege access management.
Well, let's go to that part first because I have
identity and access management. That's the other acronym. IAM.
So one of the things I think is important to think about, especially at the enterprise level, is when we talk about cloud, we're talking about business to business cloud. We're not talking about business to consumer cloud. They are different, and I'm fully aware that there are enterprises that are using consumer parts of cloud and some of those types of solutions. But when I go talk to the CISOs or I talk to the leaders of business-focused cloud providers, especially when they're doing something from a security perspective, I got to tell you, they are buttoned up. And here's a couple of things I really like. They are single-focused. So if somebody's offering me PIM as a service, that's all they're doing. They're not also trying to run their mail servers on it and a SharePoint server on it and 15 other things on the same server. They got one server. It's probably highly virtualized. They're monitoring the heck out of it, and they're always innovatively patching it, updating it, responding to customers. Those CISOs are not only responsible typically for that stuff, but then they are always talking to customers and reassuring customers that they're listening to them and they're helping with them, which is fantastic because that's really driving a lot of our innovation. So then we get to look at it and say, well, wait a minute, how are you handling that connection? Who's responsible for the data? How are you protecting it? This is not a consumer thing where they wave their hands and go, nah, you're good, don't worry about it. This is a business level. They're going to give you that level of detail or you're going to move on. So I have absolutely no reservations of it from a concept level. Now, I've not reviewed this particular one, but conceptually, I have absolutely no hesitation on suggesting that your on-premise solution is necessarily better than a dedicated team of specialists in the cloud to solve that single problem.
So I'm going to jump on that one. So I just had a client who hired me, and this is one of those great jobs you get, where they call you and they say, we want you to think about something and write a paper about it. I'm like, yeah. Like,
I love
that's
that.
awesome. I was like, I'll be happy to think all you want. But this client was wanting me to think about this very thing. It wasn't about PIM, but it's about the same idea. And I was a mainframer, so I started in this world as a mainframer, and one thing that mainframers always have is I'm going to go for that centralized solution every time because I want to cling to the control of everything as much as I can, because when those users get hold of it or even those other locations get hold of it, they're going to screw it up because I'm the best. But so as I thought,
mainframe experience, I could tell.
Right. Well, as I thought about this, I went from, how did this evolve in the mainframe world? So the mainframe was completely centralized, and I had absolute control, which I loved, to this decentralized world of disaster, where these idiots were able to touch things, to back to this sort of hybrid. And I started thinking about that in this context. I think you're always going to be better off centralizing this stuff up. So and like you said, I want to evaluate what's up there. But I do trust the cloud conceptually, in the sense that I think the expertise being pulled together into one place, the controls being pulled together into one place, if it's really buttoned up and I can be satisfied that it is buttoned up, I'm okay with it. I don't have that kind of problem, but I do want to see what's going on, and I want to see that there's some kind of standard. Is it 27,001 or what is it that's setting up there, and they can show me those documents and say, yes, we do know what we're doing. We're not just a bunch of clowns sitting in a storage building somewhere trying to run a bunch of servers. But if it is, then yeah, I have no problem with it at all.
There's a nice benefit that comes out of this too. If we start looking at the way that our environments have changed, it's fascinating. As an aside, when you talk to your kids about the technology that you didn't have growing up that they take for granted, we don't always look at that from an enterprise perspective, but I've been doing this for 2 decades, and I think back to some of the stuff that we did in the 90s versus now. It's unbelievable, those changes. And so what that means is, if somebody's in the cloud and they're looking at that and customers keep coming to them and say, okay, I need to be able to work in these countries, in these locations, on these time zones, in this type of situation, on these types of devices, and you figured out a way to be able to do that, even if we don't participate in that particular solution, there's a really cool forcing function that means now all new solutions are going to start to think that through. And you might not be in the cloud today, but I can assure you, because somebody is, you will be within the next 5 to 10 years.
I completely agree.
I think centralized play is more in the cloud. Their description says they allows people to manage multiple identities and access computer networks in cloud environments. When you look at some of the competition, such as CyberArk, which there was just a recent article in Fox Business News about how CyberArk has lost steam, and really that article is very financially stock market driven, from an investor's perspective, not so much from a customer perspective. But what I took away from both these stories is I see a slightly smaller company in Centrify, although it looks like Centrify's got $94 million in funding. CyberArk has $127 million. So, yeah, I mean, Centrify's got about 100 less employees, or roughly the same. So I look at CyberArk as a larger player, safer player, and Centrify is the innovator in the space. And now CyberArk's kind of losing steam. And what they also said about CyberArk is it's a very clean balance sheet, which maybe means they're not taking the risks they need to take to be really innovative and push research and development in this field and come out with new features that are setting a new standard, which I think is important in the security industry. Because look, one of the things we were talking about on last night's Security Weekly show was that security is not like a static thing. When we look at, and I'm comparing it to hygiene, I don't want to get into the whole discussion, but like my general hygiene is a pretty static thing. Like my teeth decay pretty statically. Like there's not new threats to my teeth unless I'm willingly partaking in them. But in security, when we talk about security solutions, the threats are constantly changing. The landscape that you're trying to protect is constantly changing. So if you're not a security solutions provider or vendor that has a very, very innovative approach to providing solutions, yeah, your stock price is gonna dip. CyberArk's starting to lose sales, and now they're saying they're going to make an investment in marketing and sales, which hopefully with some more innovation will bring them back up to approaching a market leader. And I don't necessarily know if we could put a finger on who's the market leader in this space, because you've got Thycotic, a smaller player, Lieberman, and Beyond Trust. And Beyond Trust larger in that they started in the vulnerability space as well. But I've heard good things about all products. Yeah.
Well, right, and Entrust is still in the market.
Yeah. Is that CA's product, Entrust? The CA has a product in the market too. Yeah. Maybe some of the bigger players do have a.
Bought out by DataCard.
Okay.
It's. I mean, the other piece of it. It's just like app development, though. I mean, it's the same thing when you have app development. The small players are innovative, they're flexible, they're quick to respond, but they often have products that are untried or untested, and they're not sure. So there's a lot of R&D costs. And I'm a new game developer, and I come up with this really clever thing. Then I make a lot of money. Then I get bigger. I want to be stable. My shareholders say, hey, we don't like all this change. R&D is expensive, and I'm sitting back going, well, I got this thing.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep selling this thing as long as I can sell it, and that gets stale after a while. And it is tough for big companies to be super innovative, because it costs a lot of money and they got shareholders to answer to. Whereas if Paul and I are sitting here in this room, we can go, hey, let's go for it. In worst case, we end up bankrupt and down on the corner or something.
We'd have fun doing it though.
Oh yeah.
Well, the thing about this, I was just going to say, the thing about this space is I think that there is kind of a resurgence in interest in this space, which for me is encouraging. You said you come from a mainframe background. This is the mainframe style security of role-based access control, identity management. It used to be like we'd all yawn and go, yeah. But now, when we look at some of the integrations,
CyberArk just needs to go RACF, but for the modern age.
Yes,
that's it. Yes. RACF for the modern age.
Yes, that's
band name called it.
But I truly believe that integrations with some other security products really, and CyberArk is made some smart integrations with Palo Alto and FireEye. And I know that in the UBA space, Gurukul made some awesome partnerships with a vendor. I think it was CyberArk in the PIM space. So basically, Gurukul says this user is behaving badly and tells the CyberArk, for example, hey, just go disable their access on that stuff. Same thing with Okta, which is not quite this. The Okta is more of a single sign-on, but it controls management of privilege to a certain extent, and Gurukul integrates with them. So I think the integrations in this space, as we've covered it since we started the show, are really, really interesting, because it gets down to where I think the direction of the security community needs to go is providing not just detection, but coupling that with prevention and doing that without breaking things. And this is encouraging.
That's an interesting thing too. So what's curious is I wanted to pivot off of we need to see more innovation, because I'm not convinced that that's always the case. It's almost like we just need to think about the problem that we're trying to solve. And Doug, clearly you've had experience in this. Paul, I don't know if you ever had to do this, but I've done a couple identity management projects in the last 20 years, and they were always long. They never went according to plan. They were confusing.
Yes.
And so what the cloud has done is it's caused companies to look at this and say, okay, wait a minute. I have user accounts all over the place. I can't keep track of anything. This is bad. But they didn't look at it necessarily from a security perspective per se. It was okay, this isn't going to work. Let's go do something. And that's allowed this to bubble back up.
Yep.
Now, where I then say, well, all right, I'm not sure we need the innovation to it. As I've been listening, though, as the rest of this conversation unfolds, what just triggered it for me was when you said, right, so this is our chance to look at both prevention, detection, response, everything else. Well, sure, and what do we know one of the top 5 vectors is now, right? Compromised accounts. It's because you look like you belong, and that's a lot easier. And the thing, I want to point out a quick comment on this, but it's a little bit of an aside. We in security tend to look at it as, yes, we're going to catch it when something's wrong. You could do the exact same thing, but flip it around and say, we're going to exonerate people who are doing their jobs properly, but their accounts were taken over through perhaps no fault of their own. And we'll know and we'll baseline, right? So it can be a protective measure for people as much as it's a pretty good security measure on our part. Well, so that's where I'd like to start looking at, so how are we identifying those accounts? How are we identifying where things are linked? Like, there's probably some modern or better ways to look at the problems of the last 20 years. And I think the companies that can solve those are the ones that are going to be effective going forward.
Well, I think it comes down to, I interviewed Marcus Random last night, and his mantra for the past 25 or 30 years has been, you got to understand how your network systems and users behave, and then look at the anomalies. He's like, security is really simple if you look at it from that perspective. Agreed. But it's really hard to accomplish that. However, to Michael's point, these new tools and techniques that we have, I think, can really help. And like Michael said, it's not really security. Like, single sign-on and privileged identity management is not. It's not like new or security newfangled thing. It's just understanding who should have access to what and making sure that's the case and identifying anomalies. And that's why, to me, it's really encouraging to see a lot more technology in this space available to people. And that involves the cloud, which brings me to my next story, Cloudera. Have you heard of Cloudera, Michael?
I have, but if you asked me to talk extensively about them, I would seem like an idiot.
What it seems like to me is that companies that are in the SIM, security analytics, UBA space are partnering with Cloudera because they're essentially, from what I understand, is they're taking this all into the cloud.
Right.
And Cloudera has, and I don't understand it as in depth as I should. We probably should have Cloudera on the show to talk about it. But it just makes it easier for organizations to adopt this technology. It brings down the cost. Now, you're still hosting some data in the cloud, though I would argue the time-based security risks aren't really there. In other words, if someone does gain access to it, it's probably old data, right? I mean, once it reaches the cloud, it's not real time anymore, right? And if you have analysts looking at stuff and responding to things, if someone does gain access to that data, I mean, you're almost on a level playing field. And I mean, not in all cases, certainly. We've seen vulnerabilities in cloud systems, and I think that companies like Cloudera have a vested interest in making sure that it's secure and have teams of people making sure that their stuff is secure. Amazon AWS falls in the same bucket, and it really comes down to the on-premise versus cloud. I think, as we've already stated, that these cloud providers can do it better, and it is of great benefit to you because now you're, to talk a little technical, your Hadoop instance, right, that's taking in all of your events, and now you've got all these other services that are analyzing those events for different purposes. They're taking advantage of all of that. It's going to run in faster. It's going to be upgraded, and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So
I think the other thing, and we keep sort of revisiting this, but it's important. The idea that the cloud is going to be punished for failure. If I isolate this and I run everything in my operation in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I sit there and I fail, I'm the only one who knows about it. I mean, maybe I go to business or whatever, right. But if I'm a cloud provider and I fail, if I'm AWS, it's going to be all over the internet.
Yep.
And that vulnerability is going to be exposed, and pretty soon I'm going to have no customers. So evolution is going to take care of some of this. I mean, that doesn't do you a lot of good if you get hurt in the meantime. But again, those vulnerabilities are going to be exposed. The people who don't manage this stuff properly are going to be exposed, and I think that it's a brighter light shining on the terrain than when you run everything in isolation and you're just left on your own and say, well, we don't know what happened. We got taken out.
The last story here before we embrace change. Before we take a break, host your solutions and your security monitoring all in the cloud. This is another cloud story. And I think it's interesting. When I worked from my first company, a very small company, less than 50 people, when I started, and I remember the founder and CEO of the company having this thing, embrace change, right? Because it was really frustrating for him to try and move this company forward in the late 90s with technology and with changes and grow the company. Right. And he kind of had this mantra of embrace change, and that's really what came to mind when we talked about hosting in the cloud. And this last one was Alert Logic. Basically, is partnering with Rackspace to provide security monitoring for Office 365 in the cloud. And I think this is, again, another just continuing trend we're going to see in the security industry. Not only host your solution in the cloud, but host your security solutions in the cloud alongside of each other. And we've seen that continuing trend this year. With that, I want to take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of end-user awareness training for security. Stay tuned.